It's funny how you can be living your life, thinking everything is normal, and then one day, out of nowhere, your entire world crumbles beneath your feet. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for over 15 years. We had 2 kids together, a mortgage, and a life that, on the surface, seemed pretty damn good. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was strong, or so I thought. Emily and I met in college. She was the kind of girl who could light up a room just by walking into it. She was smart, funny, and had this infectious energy that drew people to her. I fell hard and fast, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. We got married a year after graduation, and life seemed to fall into place perfectly. We both had decent jobs, bought a house, and started a family. I thought we were a team, partners in every sense of the word. But over the past year, something had changed. It wasn't sudden, more like a slow shift that I didn't notice at first. Emily started spending more time at work. She said it was because of new projects and the pressure to meet deadlines. I believed her. I mean, why wouldn't I? She was a dedicated professional, and I had always been proud of how hard she worked. But then, she started working late more often, going out for drinks with colleagues after work, and occasionally even traveling for business meetings. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'd always trusted Emily, and we had never had any serious issues with trust or fidelity. But then, the little things started to add up. She was on her phone more than usual, always quick to put it away when I came near. She was less affectionate, less interested in spending time with me and the kids. And then there were the excuses, so many excuses. She was too tired, too stressed, too busy. One night, as I sat alone in our living room after putting the kids to bed, I realized that I couldn't remember the last time we had a real conversation. We used to talk about everything, our hopes, our fears, our plans for the future. Now, we barely said more than a few words to each other in passing. When I brought it up to her, she brushed me off, said I was overthinking things, and that she was just exhausted from work. I wanted to believe her, but the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. It was around this time that Emily started making a new friend at work, Jeff. She mentioned him casually one night, said he was a new hire who had quickly become part of the team. I didn't think much of it at first. But as the weeks went by, she mentioned him more and more. Jeff this, Jeff that. It was like every other sentence out of her mouth was about him. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was just a work thing, nothing more. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The final straw came on a Saturday morning. Emily was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Jeff. "Can't wait to see you tonight," it said, followed by a heart emoji. My heart dropped into my stomach. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking as I unlocked it, something she had never bothered to change. The message thread was full of flirty texts, late-night messages, and inside jokes that had nothing to do with work. It was clear that their relationship was more than just professional. I put the phone down, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not to us. Not to me. But there it was, staring me in the face. My wife was having an affair. And I had no idea what to do next. After seeing that message, my mind went numb. I couldn't think straight, couldn't process what was happening. The woman I had loved and trusted for all these years was cheating on me, and the proof was right there in my hands. My immediate thought was the kids, our 2 innocent kids who had no idea what was going on, who thought their parents were just fine. I didn't want them to be around when I confronted Emily. I didn't want them to see what was about to happen. So, I did the only thing that made sense at the moment. I packed a quick bag for them, told them we were going on a little trip to Grandma and Grandpa's house, and loaded them into the car. They were excited, asking questions about what we would do when we got there, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. The drive to my parents' house was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I could barely focus on the road, my mind consumed with images of Emily and that bastard Jeff. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? And what the hell was I supposed to do now? When we arrived at my parents' place, I tried to put on a brave face. I didn't want to alarm the kids or my parents. I told my mom that I needed to take care of something at home and that I would be back later to pick up the kids. She didn't ask too many questions, just gave me a concerned look and told me to take my time. I kissed the kids goodbye, telling them I'd see them soon, and then I got back in the car. As I drove back home, my anger simmered just beneath the surface. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got there, but I knew I couldn't let this go. Not without a fight. Not without making sure Emily understood just how deeply she had betrayed me. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something that made my blood boil even more. Jeff's car was parked just down the street. The asshole didn't even have the decency to hide it. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing, trying to calm the rage that was building inside me. But it was useless. The second I stepped out of the car, I was on autopilot, driven by pure, unfiltered fury. The front door was unlocked, which only pissed me off more. They didn't even care enough to be discreet. I walked into the house, the familiar scent of home mixing with the stench of betrayal. I could hear noises coming from upstairs, noises that made my stomach churn. I knew what I was about to see, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it. I stormed up the stairs, taking them two at a time. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar, and I could hear Emily's voice, breathy, excited, the kind of voice I hadn't heard in years. It took everything in me not to kick the door down, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to burn this image into my mind so that I would never forget. I pushed the door open, and there they were. Emily and Jeff, tangled up in our sheets, her body wrapped around his like it was the most natural thing in the world. They didn't even notice me at first, too caught up in their own little world. It wasn't until I stepped into the room, my fists clenched at my sides, that they realized I was there. Emily's eyes went wide with shock, her mouth dropping open in horror. "Oh my God, David," she started, but I didn't let her finish. The words stuck in my throat, and all I could think about was the fact that this man, this piece of shit, was in my bed, with my wife. Without thinking, I launched myself at Jeff. All the rage, all the pain, all the betrayal came pouring out of me as I grabbed him by the neck and threw him off the bed. He hit the floor with a thud, scrambling to get away, but I was on him before he could even stand up. My fist connected with his face, and I felt something crack, maybe his nose, maybe a tooth, I didn't care. I just kept hitting him, over and over, until my knuckles were raw and bloody. Emily was screaming, begging me to stop, but her voice barely registered. All I could see was red. All I could feel was the need to make this bastard pay for what he had done, for what they had both done. Jeff was trying to fight back, but he was no match for the fury that was driving me. I wanted to destroy him, to wipe that smug, terrified look off his face forever. It wasn't until I felt Emily's hands on my shoulders, pulling me back, that I realized what I was doing. "David, stop. Please, stop," she was crying, her voice desperate, but I shrugged her off, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Jeff was lying on the floor, blood streaming from his nose and mouth, his eyes swollen shut. He looked pathetic, like the worm he was. "Get out," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. Jeff didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his clothes as he bolted out of the room, out of the house, leaving a trail of blood behind him. I could hear the front door slam as he fled, and then it was just me and Emily. She was standing there, naked and shaking, tears streaming down her face. "David, I'm so sorry, she started, but I cut her off, my voice shaking with rage. "Don't you fucking say another word," I snarled. "Not one more goddamn word." I could feel the tears stinging at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Not after what she had done. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Emily was crying, her face twisted in agony, but I felt nothing but cold, empty rage. How could she do this to me? How could she do this to our family? Finally, I turned and walked out of the room, out of the house. I couldn't stay there, couldn't stand to be in the same space as her. I needed to get out, needed to breathe, needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. As I got into my car and drove away, I felt like my entire world had been shattered into a million pieces. And I had no idea how I was ever going to put it back together. I don't remember much about the drive after I left the house. My hands were still shaking, knuckles raw and smeared with Jeff's blood. My mind was a mess, thoughts crashing into each other with no sense of direction. I must have driven aimlessly for an hour, maybe more, before I finally pulled over to the side of the road and let the reality of what had just happened sink in. I could still see their faces, Emily's shock, Jeff's terror, and it made me sick to my stomach. This wasn't supposed to be my life. We were supposed to grow old together, watch our kids grow up, and enjoy the life we'd built. But she had ripped that apart, and for what? Some cheap thrill with a younger guy who had nothing to offer but a few hours of excitement? My phone buzzed on the seat next to me, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Emily. "David, please come home. We need to talk." The nerve of her, acting like this was just some misunderstanding we could talk through. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, the pain barely registering. There was nothing left to talk about, nothing that could undo the damage she'd done. But as much as I wanted to drive away and never look back, I knew I couldn't. I had to face her, had to get answers. I had to understand why she did this, even if it destroyed me in the process. So, with a deep breath, I turned the car around and headed back home. When I pulled into the driveway, Jeff's car was gone. Good. I didn't know what I would have done if I saw it still parked there. I sat in the car for a moment, trying to collect myself. The house looked the same as it always did, quiet, unassuming, the kind of house where families lived and loved and took care of each other. But now, it felt like a tomb, filled with the ghosts of everything that had just died inside. I walked up to the front door, my legs heavy, my chest tight. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to face her. But I had to. I had to hear it from her own mouth, had to make her say the words that would tear us apart for good. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Emily was waiting for me in the living room. She had thrown on a robe, her hair still disheveled, her face blotchy from crying. The sight of her made my blood boil all over again. How could she stand there, looking so pitiful, after what she'd done? She looked at me with those tear-filled eyes, like she was the victim in all of this, and I felt the rage bubbling up inside me again. "David," she began, her voice trembling, but I cut her off. "Save it," I snapped, my voice harsh. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I want to hear the truth. Why, Emily? Why did you do this?" She flinched at the anger in my voice, but she didn't look away. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. It just did." "Bullshit," I spat. "You don't just fuck someone else. You made a choice, Emily. You made a choice to betray me, to betray our family. So don't stand there and act like you didn't have a say in it." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she wiped them away with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry, David. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why did you do it?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why the hell did you do it, Emily? Was our life not good enough for you? Was I not good enough for you?" She shook her head, her shoulders trembling as she sobbed. "It's not that," she choked out. "It's not you. It's me." She paused, struggling to find the words. I felt trapped. Like I was drowning, and I didn't know how to get out. "Trapped?" I repeated, incredulous. "Trapped in what, Emily? A stable marriage? A loving family? A fucking life that most people would kill for? She crumpled onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. I know, she cried. But I needed something different. Something that made me feel alive again. And fucking some guy who's barely out of college made you feel alive? I snapped, the bitterness in my voice undeniable. Is that what it took, Emily? Throwing away everything we built for a quick fuck with some loser? She didn't answer, just kept sobbing into her hands. The sound grated on my nerves, and I had to force myself not to start shouting again. I was furious, beyond furious, but I couldn't let it consume me. Not yet. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them if I lost control. How long? I demanded, my voice cold and steady. How long has this been going on? Emily looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. A few months, she admitted. It started when I met Jeff at work. We clicked. And I know it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. Months? I repeated, the word tasting like poison in my mouth. You've been fucking him for months? She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't like that at first, she said quickly. We were just friends, just talking. But then it turned into something more, and I couldn't stop it. I tried, David, I really tried, but you didn't, I finished for her, my voice flat. You didn't try hard enough, did you? Because you wanted it. You wanted him. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I felt sick, like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Months. She'd been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back, while I sat at home like an idiot, thinking everything was fine. Why didn't you just leave? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Why didn't you just tell me you weren't happy and end it? I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to break up our family. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You did both. Emily's sobs grew louder, her whole body shaking with the force of them. I watched her for a moment, feeling nothing but emptiness where there should have been anger. I was too tired to be angry. Too hurt to be anything but numb. So what now? I asked, my voice hollow. What do you want me to do, Emily? Pretend this never happened? Go back to the way things were? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. I want to make it right, she pleaded. I'll do anything, David. I'll go to counseling, I'll quit my job, I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Please, just give me a chance. I stared at her, my mind racing. She was begging for forgiveness, but how could I forgive her? How could I ever look at her again without seeing her in bed with another man? Without remembering the betrayal that had torn our lives apart? But as much as I wanted to scream at her, to tell her it was over, I knew it wasn't that simple. We had kids together, a life together. If I walked away now, it would destroy more than just our marriage. It would destroy everything. Fine, I said finally, my voice strained. We'll try. But I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Emily. You broke something that can't be easily fixed. I know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I swear, David, I'll make it right. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words felt empty, meaningless. She could promise the world, but it wouldn't change what she had done. Nothing would. I'm going to stay at my parents' tonight, I said, turning away from her. I need time to think. David, please don't go, she cried, standing up and reaching for me. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out how to move forward. I can't be here right now, I said, pulling away from her grasp. I need space. She didn't argue, just watched as I walked out of the room, her sobs echoing in my ears. I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door, not bothering to look back. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house for another second. As I drove away, the weight of what had happened settled on my shoulders. My marriage was in ruins, my life turned upside down, and I had no idea how to fix any of it. All I knew was that the woman I loved had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and there was no going back from that. Not now. Not ever. When I left the house that night, I didn't have a clear plan in mind. All I knew was that I couldn't be in the same space as Emily without wanting to either scream at her or break down completely. As I drove away, the anger that had simmered beneath the surface for hours started to take over. I couldn't let this go. She needed to pay for what she did, to understand the depth of the pain she caused me. I drove around aimlessly for a while, trying to clear my head, but the anger kept growing. My thoughts kept spiraling back to the same point: she had destroyed our life together for a fling. She had taken everything we had built, everything we had shared, and crushed it like it meant nothing. And the worst part? She seemed to think that a few tears and promises could make it all better. I wasn't about to let her off that easily. If she thought she could just cry her way out of this, she was dead wrong. I needed her to feel what I was feeling, to understand the depth of her betrayal. I needed her to suffer for what she'd done. I pulled over to the side of the road, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do next. I couldn't go back to the house, not yet. But I couldn't just sit there, stewing in my own anger. I needed to do something. I needed to act. And then it hit me. If she wanted to betray me, to destroy our marriage, then I would hit her where it hurt the most. I would strip away the facade she'd built, the life she thought she had, and show her just how badly she had fucked up. She had shattered our trust, so I would shatter the life she thought she could keep. I knew Emily was always careful about how she appeared to others. She valued her reputation, her image as the perfect wife and mother. She liked to be seen as a loving partner, someone who had her life together, someone who was respected and admired. If there was one thing I could take from her, it was that image. And I knew exactly how to do it. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. The first call was to a close friend of ours, someone who was well connected in the community. I kept the conversation casual, not letting on that anything was wrong. I asked if they knew of any upcoming events, fundraisers, parties, that sort of thing. They mentioned a few, including one that was happening in a couple of days. It was a charity gala that Emily and I had attended in the past. Perfect. After that, I called a tailor I knew, a guy who owed me a favor. I arranged to have a suit ready for me, something sharp and eye-catching. I didn't care about looking good for myself, I cared about making a statement. This was about sending a message. Over the next couple of days, I prepared meticulously. I played the role of the hurt, confused husband whenever Emily tried to talk to me, pretending I was still processing everything. I stayed away from the house as much as possible, telling her I needed space, that I was staying with friends to think things over. All the while, I was planning my revenge. On the night of the gala, I dressed in the suit I'd had made, a dark, tailored number that made me look like I had my shit together, even if I didn't feel that way inside. I wanted to look confident, controlled, the opposite of the emotional wreck I had been when I walked out of the house a few days earlier. When I walked into the venue, I could feel the eyes on me. People knew us, they knew Emily and me as the couple that always came together, always put on a good show. So when they saw me walk in alone, looking sharp but with a hint of something dark behind my eyes, the whispers started almost immediately. I didn't acknowledge them. I didn't need to. I was here to make a point, and I was going to make damn sure it was heard loud and clear. I mingled, smiled, made small talk with people I knew, all the while keeping an eye on the door, waiting for Emily to arrive. I knew she would come, she wouldn't miss an event like this. Not when she knew it would raise eyebrows if she didn't show. Sure enough, about an hour into the event, she walked in. She looked beautiful, as always. She had dressed carefully, obviously wanting to project an image of calm and grace. But I could see the tension in her eyes, the way she was scanning the room, looking for me. When she finally saw me, her face softened with relief, and she started to make her way over. But I didn't give her the chance. I turned away, moving deeper into the crowd, leaving her to navigate the whispers and curious glances on her own. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. She had to feel the weight of what she had done, had to understand that she was no longer in control. As the night went on, I made it a point to talk to as many people as possible, especially those who were close to us. I didn't have to say much, just a few carefully chosen words here and there, little hints that all was not well in our marriage. The whispers grew louder, and soon, Emily was surrounded by people who were too polite to ask outright but clearly dying to know what was going on. When she finally cornered me near the bar, I could see the desperation in her eyes. "David, can we talk?" she pleaded, her voice low and urgent. I took a sip of my drink, letting the silence hang between us for a moment before I responded. "Talk about what, Emily? How you fucked another man in our bed? Or how you lied to me for months while I trusted you with everything?" Her face paled, and she glanced around nervously, aware that people were watching us. "Please, not here," she whispered. "Let's go somewhere private." "No," I said flatly. "We're not doing this on your terms anymore. You wanted to destroy our marriage, so now you get to deal with the consequences." She looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't care. I was done with her tears, done with her lies. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it, in front of everyone she had fooled. I left her standing there, her face a mix of shock and hurt, and walked back into the crowd. The rest of the night was a blur of faces, voices, and the satisfaction of knowing that I had planted the seeds of doubt in everyone's mind. I had taken the first step in dismantling the perfect life she thought she could keep, and it felt damn good. When the night finally came to an end, I walked out of the venue, my head held high. I knew that by the next day, everyone in our social circle would be talking about what had happened. The rumors would spread, and Emily would be the one left to pick up the pieces. As I drove back home, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was still there, but it was tempered by the knowledge that I had taken back some control. I wasn't just a victim of her betrayal, I was an active participant in her downfall. When I walked into the house, Emily was waiting for me, her eyes red from crying. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said coldly. "We're done talking for tonight. Go to bed." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and walked up the stairs, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched her go, feeling nothing but emptiness. She had destroyed our life, and now I was going to destroy hers. Slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for her to hold on to. The satisfaction of humiliating Emily at the gala lingered for a few days, but it wasn't enough. As much as I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, I couldn't get the image of Jeff out of my mind. The way he looked at me when I caught them in bed, the fear in his eyes as I beat him to the ground, it wasn't enough. He deserved more. He needed to understand that he had crossed a line, and there were consequences for that. I spent the next few days trying to focus on work, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jeff's face. The anger bubbled up inside me, a constant reminder that I wasn't done yet. He had taken something from me, something that wasn't his to take, and I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. He needed to feel the same pain he had caused me. I started digging into his life. It wasn't hard to find out more about him. Emily had left enough clues for me to piece it all together. Jeff was younger than me by a few years, probably in his early 30s. He worked at the same company as Emily, but in a different department. He wasn't married, no kids, just a single guy who thought he could screw around with someone else's wife and get away with it. I found his social media profiles easily enough. He had the kind of life you'd expect from someone like him: parties, vacations, pictures with different women, always with that same smug smile on his face. The more I learned about him, the more I hated him. He was everything I despised in a person: arrogant, self-centered, and completely oblivious to the damage he caused. I spent a few days gathering information, making a list of all the things I could use against him. He had a good job, a decent social life, and a reputation to protect. He might have thought he could keep what happened with Emily a secret, but I was about to blow that wide open. If he thought he could destroy my life and walk away unscathed, he was in for a rude awakening. The first step was to make sure his little escapade with Emily became public knowledge. I went through Emily's phone, looking for any evidence that could tie them together. Sure enough, there were plenty of text messages, pictures, and even a couple of videos that painted a clear picture of their relationship. I saved everything to a separate file, making sure I had copies of everything before I put her phone back where I found it. Next, I reached out to a mutual acquaintance who worked in Jeff's department. This guy wasn't exactly a friend, but he wasn't a stranger either. We'd crossed paths a few times at company events, and I knew he had a bit of a gossip streak. I casually mentioned that I had heard some rumors about Jeff and Emily, playing it off like I didn't really believe it but was just curious. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he absorbed the information, and I knew it wouldn't take long for the gossip to spread like wildfire. Once I had planted the seed, I started working on the next phase of my plan. I knew that Jeff's reputation at work was important to him. He was one of those guys who thrived on being liked and respected by his peers. I also knew that his career was on an upward trajectory, and any scandal could derail that. So, I made sure to gather enough evidence to ruin him professionally. I put together a package with all the incriminating evidence I had collected, screenshots of text messages, photos, and videos. I included a note detailing his affair with Emily and how it had affected my family. I sent the package anonymously to his HR department, making sure it would land on the desk of someone who would take action. I knew that once the higher-ups got wind of this, Jeff's days at the company would be numbered. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to hit him where it really hurt, his finances. I found out that Jeff had recently invested in a small startup, something he was excited about and had been bragging about to his friends online. It didn't take much to find out who his partners were and how to contact them. I sent them an anonymous email, posing as a concerned citizen, and included the same incriminating evidence I had sent to his HR department. I suggested that they reconsider their partnership with someone who was embroiled in a scandal that could reflect poorly on their business. The fallout from my actions was swift. Within a week, rumors about Jeff and Emily's affair were circulating through the office. People whispered behind his back, giving him looks of disdain whenever he walked by. It wasn't long before HR called him in for a meeting, and word spread that he had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. His once promising career was suddenly on shaky ground. But the real blow came when his business partners pulled out of the startup, citing concerns about his personal conduct. Without their support, the startup floundered, and Jeff's investment went down the drain. He was left scrambling, trying to salvage what was left of his reputation and his finances, but it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no coming back from it. I could have stopped there, satisfied with the knowledge that I had ruined his life just as he had tried to ruin mine. But I wasn't finished. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized just how badly he had fucked up. I wanted to see him broken, just like he had broken me. So, I decided to pay him a visit. I knew where he lived, another piece of information I had gathered during my research. One evening, after I knew he would be home, I drove over to his apartment. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got there, but I knew I needed to confront him one last time. When I arrived at his building, I stood outside for a moment, gathering my thoughts. I could see the lights on in his apartment, the faint glow of the television flickering through the window. I took a deep breath and walked up to the door, my fists clenched at my sides. I knocked, and a few moments later, the door opened. Jeff stood there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His face was bruised and swollen from our last encounter, and he flinched when he saw me standing there. "What the hell do you want?" he muttered, his voice shaky. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at him, letting the silence stretch out between us. I wanted him to feel the weight of my presence, to understand that this wasn't over until I said it was. Finally, I spoke. "I want you to understand what you've done," I said, my voice low and steady. You thought you could fuck my wife and get away with it, that it was just a bit of fun. But you were wrong. You've ruined your career, your finances, and your reputation. And I'm just getting started." His eyes widened in fear, and he took a step back, as if he could somehow escape what was coming. "I didn't mean to," he started, but I cut him off. "I don't care what you meant," I snapped, stepping closer. "You made a choice, Jeff. And now you're going to live with the consequences. Every time you look in the mirror, every time you think about what you've lost, I want you to remember that this is your fault. You did this to yourself." He was trembling now, his back pressed against the wall as I loomed over him. I could see the terror in his eyes, the realization that he was completely at my mercy. "I'm going to walk away now," I said, my voice cold and final. "But don't think for a second that this is over. If you ever come near my wife again, if you even think about her, I will destroy whatever is left of your pathetic life. Do you understand?" He nodded frantically, too scared to speak. "Good," I said, stepping back. "Now get out of my sight." He practically tripped over himself as he scrambled to close the door, and I heard the lock click behind him. I stood there for a moment, letting the satisfaction wash over me. I had made my point, and I knew it would stick with him for the rest of his life. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange sense of calm. The rage that had consumed me for so long was finally starting to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve. I had taken back control, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me again. Jeff had tried to destroy my life, but in the end, it was his life that lay in ruins. And as I drove away from his apartment, I knew that I was finally ready to move on to the next chapter, whatever that might be. I knew this moment was inevitable. After everything that had happened, there was no way our marriage could survive. But knowing it didn't make it any easier. I had spent the last few days keeping myself busy, trying to avoid the confrontation that I knew was coming. But it was time. We had to face reality, and we had to do it together. When I walked into the house that evening, I found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. She looked exhausted, her eyes puffy from crying, her hair disheveled. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered why we were in this situation, and any sympathy I might have had evaporated. "Emily," I said, my voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and fear. She knew what was coming, and I could see that she was bracing herself for it. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been thinking about it, too." I sat down across from her, folding my hands on the table. "There's no easy way to say this," I began, keeping my tone as even as possible. "But we both know that our marriage is over. There's no coming back from what happened." She winced at my words, but she didn't argue. She knew it was true. "I never wanted it to end like this," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to." "Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand to stop her. "Don't make excuses, Emily. We're past that. What's done is done, and now we have to figure out how to move forward." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, David," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can never make up for. I don't know what to do." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "The only thing we can do is end this as peacefully as possible," I said. "We need to think about the kids, about what's best for them. They don't deserve to be caught in the middle of this." She nodded again, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I agree," she said quietly. "They've been through enough already. I don't want to make it any harder for them." For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of the situation hanging heavy in the air. I could see the regret in her eyes, the pain she was feeling, but it didn't change anything. The damage was done, and there was no going back. "I've thought a lot about this," I said finally, breaking the silence. "And I think the best thing for the kids is for them to stay with you." Emily looked up at me, surprise flickering across her face. You really think that's best? She asked, her voice shaky. Yes, I said firmly. You're their mother, and despite everything, they need you. I'm not going to tear them away from the only home they've ever known. They'll stay here with you, and I'll make sure to be involved in their lives as much as possible. Her eyes filled with tears again, and she nodded, clearly relieved. Thank you, David, she whispered. I didn't expect. I thought you might. I'm not doing this for you, I said, cutting her off. I'm doing this for them. They've already lost enough. I'm not going to make them suffer any more than they have to. She nodded again, her lips trembling as she tried to hold back her sobs. I understand, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I'll make sure they know that you'll still be there for them. I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. This was hard enough without letting myself get dragged down into the sadness that was threatening to overwhelm me. We'll need to work out the details, I said, my voice steady. Visitation, holidays, everything. But the most important thing is that they know we're both still here for them, even if we're not together. Emily wiped her eyes again, nodding in agreement. I'll do whatever it takes to make this as easy as possible for them, she said. I don't want them to feel like they're losing their family. They won't, I said firmly. We'll make sure of that. For a moment, there was another heavy silence, and then Emily took a deep breath. What about us? She asked, her voice trembling. What do we do now? I looked at her, trying to find the right words. There's nothing left for us, I said finally, my voice cold but not unkind. You made your choice, and now we have to live with it. I don't hate you, Emily, but I can't stay with you. Not after what you did. She flinched, but she didn't argue. She knew I was right. I understand, she whispered, her voice breaking. I wish things could be different. So do I admitted, my voice softening for the first time. But they're not. We have to face reality. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, David, she whispered again. I know that doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that. I know, I said quietly. And I'm sorry, too. Sorry that it came to this. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us. I could see the regret in her eyes, the pain she was feeling, but it didn't change anything. The damage was done, and there was no going back. Finally, I stood up, unable to bear the tension any longer. I'll start looking for a place, I said, my voice firm. I'll be out of here as soon as possible. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and resignation. You don't have to rush, she said softly. We can take our time figuring things out. No, I said, shaking my head. I think it's best if we make a clean break. The sooner we do this, the sooner we can all start moving on. She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, she whispered. If that's what you want. It's what's best, I said, my voice firm. I turned to leave the kitchen, but then I paused, turning back to look at her one last time. Take care of them, Emily, I said, my voice softening. They need you. I will, she promised, her voice choked with emotion. I swear, David, I'll do everything I can to make this right for them. I nodded, satisfied with her answer. Good. With that, I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sitting there, alone with her regrets. As I made my way upstairs to the bedroom that would soon no longer be mine, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, relief. This was the end of one chapter, and the beginning of another, and I had no idea what the future held. But one thing was certain, I was done with this marriage, done with the lies, and done with the betrayal. It was time to move on, to start over, and to figure out who I was without Emily. And as painful as it was, I knew it was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. The days that followed our conversation were a blur of activity and emotion. I had made up my mind to leave, but the logistics of untangling a life built over 15 years were far more complicated than I had anticipated. I spent hours packing up my belongings, trying to separate what was mine from what would stay behind with Emily and the kids. Each item I picked up brought back memories, some good, some bitter, all of them painful to relive. Emily stayed out of my way, for the most part. We barely spoke, communicating only when necessary, mostly about the kids and how we would handle the transition. It was as if we were both trying to pretend that this was just another phase, something we would get through like any other challenge we had faced in our marriage. But deep down, we both knew this was different. There was no coming back from this. When I wasn't packing, I was busy looking for a new place to live. I didn't want to go far. I wanted to be close enough to see the kids regularly, to be a part of their lives even if I wasn't living with them anymore. I found a small apartment a few miles away, nothing fancy, but it was clean, quiet, and would give me the space I needed to start over. I signed the lease and arranged to move in within the week. The kids were the hardest part. They were too young to fully understand what was happening, and I didn't want to burden them with the details of why their parents were splitting up. Emily and I had agreed to tell them together, to try and present a united front, even if it was the last thing we did as a couple. We sat them down in the living room one evening, their innocent faces looking up at us with confusion and worry. "Mommy and Daddy need to talk to you about something important," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. I glanced at Emily, who nodded, her own face pale and tense. "Your dad and we've decided that it's best if we don't live together anymore," she said gently, her voice trembling slightly. "But we both love you very much, and that will never change. We'll still be a family, even if we're not all in the same house." The kids didn't say anything at first. They just looked back and forth between us, trying to process what we were telling them. Finally, our youngest spoke up, her voice small and scared. "Are you getting divorced?" she asked, her eyes wide with fear. The word hung in the air like a dark cloud, heavy and ominous. Emily and I exchanged a quick glance, and I knew we were both thinking the same thing. We couldn't lie to them, but we also didn't want to overwhelm them with too much information. "We're still figuring everything out," I said softly, reaching out to take her hand. "But no matter what happens, we'll always be here for you. You can talk to us about anything, okay? We love you both so much." That seemed to calm them down a little, but the sadness in their eyes was unmistakable. It broke my heart to see them like that, to know that I was the one causing their pain, even if it wasn't my fault. I wanted to protect them, to shield them from all of this, but there was no way to do that. They were a part of this, just as much as Emily and I were. Over the next few days, I continued packing and finalizing my move. The kids started to adjust, though there were moments when they would cling to me, asking if I really had to go. Each time, I reassured them that I wasn't going far, that I would see them all the time. But it didn't make it any easier to leave. The night before I was set to move out, I sat down in the living room, surrounded by boxes and the remnants of our life together. Emily joined me, sitting down on the couch across from me. We hadn't had a real conversation since the night we decided to end things, and I could tell she was struggling with what to say. "David," she began, her voice quiet and hesitant. "I know this is the right thing to do, but I just want to say that I'm sorry. For everything. I know I can't take back what I did, but I want you to know that I regret it more than anything. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at her, feeling a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a strange sense of closure. "I know you're sorry," I said, my voice tired. "But sorry doesn't fix what happened. It doesn't change the fact that you betrayed me, that you destroyed our marriage." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life." There was a long pause, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I knew this was our final conversation as husband and wife, the last time we would speak to each other in this way. It felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. "Take care of the kids," I said finally, my voice rough with emotion. "They need you. And make sure they know that I'll always be there for them, no matter what." I will, she promised, her voice breaking. I'll do everything I can to make sure they're okay. I nodded, feeling a sense of finality settle over me. This was it. The end of our marriage, the end of everything we had built together. There was nothing more to say. I'll come by tomorrow to pick up the rest of my things, I said, standing up and heading toward the stairs. I think it's best if we keep things as civil as possible, for the kids' sake. Of course, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I want the same thing. I didn't look back as I walked up the stairs and into the bedroom that had once been ours. I finished packing the last of my belongings, the silence of the house pressing down on me like a physical weight. Everything felt surreal, like I was moving through a fog, disconnected from the reality of what was happening. The next morning, I loaded the boxes into the car, making sure to do it before the kids woke up. I didn't want to drag out the goodbyes any longer than necessary. Emily came out to say goodbye, her face pale and drawn, but I kept the conversation brief. There was no point in dragging it out. As I drove away from the house, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in a long time. The weight of the past few months was still there, but it was starting to lift, just a little. I knew it would take time to heal, to move on, but I also knew that this was the first step. When I arrived at my new apartment, I spent the day unpacking, trying to make the space feel like home. It was a far cry from the house I had just left, but it was mine, and that was enough for now. As the sun set, I sat on the small balcony, looking out at the city lights and thinking about everything that had happened. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the life I had now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. There was still a long road ahead, but I was ready to face it, ready to start over and build something new. As I sat there, I thought about the kids, about how I would be there for them no matter what. They were the most important thing in my life, and I was determined to make sure they knew that. I might not be living with them anymore, but I would always be their father, and nothing would change that. Emily and I were over, but that didn't mean I had to lose everything. I still had the kids, still had my own life to live. And as painful as it was to let go of the past, I knew that it was the only way to move forward. So I took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill my lungs, and made a promise to myself: I would rebuild, I would find happiness again, and I would be the best father I could be. And no matter what the future held, I would face it head on, with the strength I had found in myself through this ordeal. The end of one chapter was just the beginning of another. And this time, I would be the one writing the story.